I call Chris Bishop.
Oh, thank you, Mr Speaker. Look, very pleased to take a call on the second reading of this important bill. I just want to make a couple of remarks briefly. Firstly, just to respond to some of the criticism that's come from members opposite. I think it was David Shearer in the first reading of this bill posed the somewhat provocative question, or statement actually, that the government wasn't standing up for New Zealanders or for Kiwis. And sir, I actually think the record will show the opposite. Actually, looked at in the light of day, the cold reality of the situation, the record will show the opposite. The government has stood up for Kiwis. The Prime Minister has stood up for New Zealanders. Minister Woodhouse, who's here in front of me, and other ministers have expressed their concern at some of the Australian policies that have come to light in the last 18 months or so. But sir, Australia is a sovereign country that makes its own laws and makes its own rules, and actually at the end of the day there is little that New Zealand can do about that, but what we can do, sir, is manage our own affairs and put in place a regime that this legislation does to make sure that we manage those who are returning to New Zealand. Sir, the second thing I want to briefly touch on is whether or not this law should have come before Parliament sooner. And members opposite, particularly Jacinda Ardern and Calvin Davis, have suggested that this should have happened way back in February or March. Jacinda Ardern said the government had known about this situation since April 2014. Well, actually, sir, as the Minister said in her second reading contribution, this wasn't in the bin, wasn't in the briefing to incoming ministers that gets provided. This was a law change made by amendments to the Migration Act in Australia in December 2014. The Minister was adverted to this in February 2015. And sir, imagine what would have happened if the government had turned up in Parliament and one of the first things that we'd done for the year, at the start of this year, was to immediately legislate to deal with that situation. Well, members opposite would have been up in arms. They would have cried it was an outrage. They would have said the government was moving too quickly. They would have said the government's legislating in haste. They'll make mistakes, and you can write your script yourself, sir. That is exactly what members would have done. And actually, sir, that would not have been the right thing to do, because the government has taken a deliberate process over the last few months, working with the Australians to set up a register and get that information out of them that will allow this legislation to be effective. And now we come before the House today to legislate to put it into place, sir. So there's been a lot of hot air from members opposite. There's been a lot of huffing and puffing, as my colleague Alfred Nara says. There's been a lot of huffing and puffing from Dennis O'Rourke, but that is typical of that member. But actually, sir, when looked at in the cold, hard light of day, sir, this is a necessary bill. It's necessary to legislate under urgency, and the government can hold its head up high when it comes to this issue. Thank you, sir.